Hi, Misha here, and today I'm going to talk about the Russian Sukhoi SU-24M FENCER. This is an interdiction supersonic jet aircraft, also attack bomber, strike bomber, that was designed in the 60s and 70s, has been in Russian service ever since. And because Hobby Master does not do an SU-24, the only company I could find that does in the 172 diecast was Caliber Wings. And there are a lot of caveats, it seems, with Caliber Wings. Some very good things and some very bad things about this company and their models. So I'm going to talk maybe more about the model than usual. And on the table, for comparison, I have my Hobby Master MiG-23, and also my Sukhoi SU-24. They seemed kind of good contemporaries of this plane. Well, Sukhoi got started in World War II with the SU-1. The SU-2 was a bomber, and then after the war, really its first jet was the SU-7, at least that went into any kind of production. And this was released in the mid-50s as kind of competition for American jets like the F-86 and later the F-100. But the SU-7 was a daytime interceptor and fighter bomber, so it had limitations. Around the 1960s, different countries became interested in variable sweep wings as well as vertical takeoff or short takeoff and landing. And when Russia was first going for a tactical fighter, let's call it, like a tactical fighter bomber, Sukhoi put the SU-15, which had a kind of a hybrid swing wing design, up against this critter here, MiG's 23, which is a full swing wing plane. Now I have a full video on this one, so you can check the vlogger out if you like. This one's from the Libyan Air Force. It's actually pretty neat. And so this became Russia's first swing wing fighter. It was essentially meant as a shorter range ground attack, strike, close support craft. It was armed with 4 missiles plus a 5th hardpoint under the fuselage. And its wings, of course, could move in and out, so on and so forth. And these were going into service in the very late 60s and became quite common in the 70s, but never really saw a ton of success outside of the Soviet Union. So the SU-15 lost out, more or less, to that, but they still produced about 1,300 of them. And that directly led to this here. Well, sort of. Let's back up one sec. When the Russian military went with the SU-7, they had said way back then in the 50s they wanted eventually an all-weather version that could be used as an interdictor, a more long-range strike or interceptor aircraft. In 1965, Russia pretty much approved the idea for Sukhoi to try takeoff jets for either a VTOL, vertical takeoff, or stall a short takeoff. This became the T-6 prototype. And of course there were several versions and variants and different ideas tried out. This first flew in 1967, the T-6, but in the interim, America had come out with the F-111, later named the Aardvark. This was really the first successful variable geometry airplane, so they went back to the drawing board and reworked the T-6 to give it variable geometry wings, dropping the VTOL system, because the problem was with vertical takeoff and landing, especially using 1960s Soviet technology. It was heavy, cumbersome, and really limited the armament and range. You know, there's lots of downsides. So they went back, they came out with the T-6-2I prototype, which had a swing wing. And it first flew in 1970 or 1971, depending on who you ask. So, very early 70s. It was given the go-ahead and was officially designated as the SU-24 in 1974, going into service in 1975. It took a long time to develop this craft because, frankly, it had a rocky design, development, testing period. Several pilots were killed, several prototype aircraft were lost, but on the other hand, it was using pretty radically new technologies for that day and time. So what do we have here? Well, our biggest deal, of course, are these wings. And essentially, fully out like this, would have the plane ready for taking off or landing. And then partial, at either 35 or 45 degrees, would be normal cruising at normal altitude. That should be mostly where it would be at in the air. And then all the way back, fully swept almost to 70 degrees, would be used for the plane basically diving out of the sky to deliver ordnance or make a quick strike with its rapid-fire cannon. It also gave the plane a very small silhouette when the wings were fully folded up. In fact, fully out, it's over 56 feet wide, but fully in, it's under 35 feet wide. So you really are saving a lot of space. This plane is a big one. All the Sukhois seem to be pretty big. My cat's out there meowing. It's at over 73 feet long. It had 6 to 9 hard points on the underside, depending on which exact model and variation. It could carry, of course, air-to-air missiles for defense, air-to-surface missiles for primary attack, as well as guided and unguided bombs, as well as rockets. And it also was set up for several types of surveillance pods and things of that nature. And it could also carry nuclear weapons if needed, because it was a strike bomber. Luckily, it was never used for that. It has a crew of 2 and a side-by-side cockpit here. Kind of unique to Soviet planes. Of course, the F-111 had I keep wanting to say tandem, I apologize. A side-by-side cockpit too. We had a pilot and commander, and then you also had a weapons officer and a specialist on board who would handle any kind of equipment. It had only a 20mm cannon, but it was rapid fire, and it had 500 rounds of ammunition. So they were kind of going with more of a lot of smaller bullets versus maybe a 30mm. But again, for a strike on the ground, it could have been just what the doctor ordered. These went into production and service. It's also worth pointing out the cockpit, much like on the SU-25, which came out just a little bit before this, is armored. This is an armored plane, maybe not as much as some others, but it does have some armoring. And performance-wise, it's no speed demon. It can get up to about Mach 1.6, so it's adequate. Now, it actually has a pretty low ceiling. It can only get up to about 36,000 feet maximum, which is quite low for the 1970s. But a lot of that was done to sacrifice some performance to allow it to do other things. And this was more or less a low-altitude craft. It was never really something meant to be up there like the MiG-25, let's say. So yeah, these started to go into service. They were first used in Afghanistan for strikes on Mujahideen targets in 1984, and then again 1988 and 89, and they had a good record. None of them were lost in combat there. Iraq would have 30 in its inventory during the first Gulf War, 1991. Of those 30, 24 were sent over, fled to Iran. 5 were destroyed while still on the ground, and one of them actually survived the war and continued to be operated by Saddam Hussein's government in the 1990s. Sukhoi would produce about 1,400 of these, so a respectable number. And actually they're still in Russian service today. They've been used in both Chechen wars. They were seen in Georgia, and of course they've been used in Ukraine, and this model here is actually of a Ukrainian. They've also been used since 2015 in Syria. As of 2008, Russia had about 430 in its inventory, kind of depending on who you ask, and again, depending on which they consider to be still in good order and which are kind of falling apart. And by 2014 or so, maybe 2015, they were down to about 300 operational. And today, this is why I brought her out, the SU-24, while still officially in service, is being replaced by the SU-34. And actually, they're thinking they only need about 100 SU-34s to replace the 300 or so SU-24s. The 34 here is a little bit bigger. We're about 76 feet and some change. Wingspan's about 48 foot. Still has a 2-man crew. This one actually gets a bathroom. Of course, it's just much more modern. It carries much more up-to-date ordnance, weapons, sensors, safety systems even. Has a larger capacity of 12 hard points with ability to lift more powerful engines. It can get up past Mach 1.8, and most importantly, it can go over 50,000 feet, so a much higher altitude than the older plane. Interesting plane, and the last one really needed to get for my SU collection. And again, Hobby Master has not really done one. Caliber wings. Interesting company. I knew before getting this it was probably going to come in with some broken or loose parts. Everyone who seems to have bought these, that's what they end up with. And it seems to be a glue failure. I'm not sure if they're not using the right glue or enough glue, but parts are not staying glued. I actually think they're using the wrong glue, or maybe they're not letting it set. It seems like it just doesn't set properly. So mine came in with the nose cone off, which is almost universal, I believe. It also came in with one of the two underwing pylons off, which actually looked to be snapped off, but they are just hanging down, so it wouldn't take much. And another interesting thing, this does come with the option of landing gear up or down, and the way they plug in on this one is magnets. And well, the magnets work great. They're not actually glued on that well. So two of my magnets were not properly glued into their plastic covers. So I had to glue those in. All expected things, unfortunately. I've also noticed the ordnance is quite delicate. I'm probably going to just glue it all on because it actually only uses a couple of little studs. And they don't really peg in very securely. And they aren't very repeatable. Seems like the first time you try to put them in, they're too tight. And then after that, they're too loose. So I think the best thing is just to figure out how you want to do it and just glue them on. Also, the wings are pretty loose. They, not as mad as some, not as bad as, like, say, a Corgi, but not as tight as a Hobbymaster, and your stabilizers here move, but they're also a little loose. Again, not the worst, but they will flop around on you a bit. So that's the bad. But actually, I would say all in all, there's more good. For one, these are well painted. They have good detail. They are heavy. Maybe not the most metal I've felt in a die-cast model, but a good amount. The cockpit does open and close. It does come with the crew. They are removable, I believe, but they came already in it and haven't actually pulled them out. I also like that the pitot tube doesn't come already pre-installed. You can put it in yourself. And all this little stuff on it, I love this material they use. It's almost rubber. It's flexible. That is great. Because when you ding it, it's not going to just immediately snap off. If you get really hard, stiff plastic, it's just going to... But if you get a little give to it, it's just going to kind of wave unless you really hit it, which means you are probably being an idiot. But I really like that they make the little stuff out of kind of a semi-flexible material. I think that's just for safety's sake a great idea. I also think the magnet for landing gear is a great idea, but I'd go a step further. Instead of using tiny little pigs for the ordnance, let's give these magnets too. Or at least something more like a Hobbymaster with a slot. It does come with quite a few accessories. Tanks and rocket pods and bombs and missiles. This stand is a little different, but it comes with 6, I believe, arms total. I used the ones that are all the same length here for this one, but you can use shorter, taller ones, and you can move them and then kind of clamp them down with screws. They do have rubber on the balls, so if it holds up, at first I wasn't sure, and really getting it stable, getting it configured right and getting your screws down. But if you do it right, it actually could be a pretty dynamic stand. I wouldn't mind buying some extras for different planes. For example, my Hobbymaster E2 Hawkeye, it stands a piece of shit. I'm sorry, it's just too small of a stand for that plane, and it breaks the stand under its own freaking weight, which is just crazy. something like this I think would work better for that. Now, I do think some other Hobby Master stands are okay because they actually use metal for the stem, and they also make them shorter. I think the problem with that Hawkeye is it's a plastic stem, and it's just way too tall. They should have used a shorter stem. But I digress. The packaging is nice. It's a lot like a Hobby Master, but just a little bit better. Again, it has a magnet for the front flap. They like magnets, I guess, over at Caliber Wings. And gluing the pieces on, the nose was no problem at all. It popped right on very tight. I really didn't need to use glue, but I did anyway, just to do it. The pylon was a little tricky. This one, it was actually no, it was this one, I believe. Yeah, I think it was the one on the... Yeah, I'm just thinking because I put it on upside down, so it would have been the one on the right. So yeah, it was this pylon over here. But even then, it went into a slot, and it seems to be fine. And if it breaks loose again, I'll really get out the heavy guns glue. For now, I'll just use a little modeling glue. And of course, the same thing goes for gluing those little magnets on. Not a big deal. And that's, concealed anyway, so I went really heavy with the glue because it's being pulled, so I didn't want it to be pulled off again. So if you ever took the landing gear off mine, you'd probably see big blobs of glue onto little pads, but you won't see it on the stand, so I don't care. Better glue than sorry. The plane feels good. Even though some of the little pieces feel kind of flimsy, like these little missiles on the sides, they're kind of hanging on there and they kind of wiggle. I'm going to have to glue those, I think. I haven't had any of the little studs or anything break on me, so that seems okay. The wings are metal on this one, whereas on the Hobby Master 23, they are plastic. But to be fair, on the Hobby Master F14, they are metal. So I think it's just because that's a smaller one. So what I'm thinking on the Caliber Wings, it's a new company. I think they have a lot of good ideas. And I think they really do care. There is attention to detail, and they're trying some innovations like the stand and the landing gear attachment that no one else has done. But I think their execution over, I'm sure, the factories in China, either they were using the wrong type of the glue, or they're gluing in the wrong conditions in maybe a contaminated environment where the glue was not sitting properly, or they just need to use more glue. They might have been trying to save 50 cents per model by, using 1 fraction of an ounce less of glue. I don't know. But I think they need to fix the glue issue, because most all of the issues I see here are glue related. Also, the ordnance, I would try to go to maybe a new way of pegging ordnance in, because this way is not very durable. And the stand, I'm hoping it stands up. I hope it lasts. That's my only concern. If it does, like I said, I'd like to buy some new ones. I'm just not convinced. You might laugh at me, but I think so far my favorite factory stands are actually the ones from Corgi. They're plastic, but they're a little beefier than Hobby Master, and they're pretty simple, and you can rotate the planes on them, which I think is nice. And they usually have pretty wide bases. So, really, it's a nice plane. It's probably overpriced considering the issues. I actually bought this one on clearance as a defect, essentially, knowing I'd have to do work, and the vendor just wanted to kind of get rid of them because they were a problem. They are supposed to be coming out with a new version, new tooling. Originally, they said August, but I heard last month that that's been pushed back to at least September. And whenever that happens a couple of times, I get kind of leery. Not really sure what's going on there. Seems like the company financially may be having some hard times. Who knows? So while these are still available in America, and while I could find a slightly damaged one at a reduced price, I decided after debating it for a few days to go ahead and grab one, because this seems like one of those models, since there aren't many other SU-24s out there, that if they disappear and if Caliber Wings takes longer to bring more out than they were saying, or if, God forbid, something happens and they go out of business, this could be one of those crazy priced ones you see on eBay or Amazon in a year or so. So I just needed this to kind of wrap out my issue collection. Plus, swing wing planes, variable geometry planes, are just fun to have. Really like my 23. And again, this is a current service plane. Even though it's being phased out, they're still using them to this very day in Russia. I hope that was reasonably comprehensive. I wanted to kind of review this a bit more than I usually do because there was more to talk about. But generally, I'm pretty darn pleased with it. You know, especially expecting it to come in with some issues. But since most of the issues were just failure of glue to stick, just re-glue and go on about your life. But if you're wanting one that pulls right out of the package and is ready to display, if you're not a modeler, avoid. But if you don't mind an hour or so worth of tinkering, you might give it a try. Well, if you have any questions or comments, I welcome them below as always. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. And as I mentioned from time to time, if you'd like to use the promo code Misha, M-I-S-H-A, over at PetesCollectibles.com, you can save 15% and get reduced or free shipping. And I just say that I'm not getting a kickback or anything. He's just been real helpful to me, kind of just grabbing models and taking more time than most vendors would. So just trying to, pay back a little bit. I like doing things for people who like doing things for me. And a lot of my models have ended up coming from him. Not all, of course, but a decent amount. And I've always found him to be as advertised. Well, this is Misha, and I will catch you very soon next time.